Welcome, everybody. Hi. Hi. What a friendly crowd. My name is Michael Mikowski. I'm the author of Single-Page Web Applications, JavaScript End-to-End, the book on single-page web applications, if you ask me anyway. I'm here today to talk about something that I think is the final frontier in making web applications comparable to traditional applications that you see on the desktop, or even comparable in some ways to, like, say, Flash applications. So, without further ado, let me fire up the slide deck, and we'll walk through things. By the way, show of hands here, who works with the CSS currently out in the crowd? Well, I think this is a presentation for you. Who here hates it? You should. You really should, because it's really a mess, if you think about it. If you look at how complicated it is to style HTML and web pages these days, and how divorced it is from your application logic, it's really kind of depressing. I mean, you look at somebody who's doing an iOS or an Android application, and if they want to change the way something appears on the screen, they just do it, right? But we've got to, like, know in advance. We have to know that somebody's going to press the blue button on page 3 approximately 30 minutes after they start the application, and then we want it to look a certain way. And if it's an hour later, then we want it to look a different way, right? We have to foresee these things. We have to go back to our wireframes and determine what all possible styles are going to show up in our application. And then we got to pre-compile them. We can't just show them. We've got to put them through some sort of meta language that further obfuscates the styling component, CSS, that we're using, which isn't difficult enough already, apparently. Right? So I'm kind of passionate about that because I think it sucks. And so today we're going to talk about a way that we unsuckified it, if that's a word. And let's see if we can't get this to move to the opposite side. You guys are seeing my speaker notes. That's not fair. Let's end the show. Bring it over here. And let's try that again. There we go. This one right here? Kind of hard for me to see. I was on it? That was the Exchange one? Yep. There we go. All right. Thank you so much for helping me out with that. OK, so there we go. Dump less in SASS with Dynamic CSS powered by JavaScript. All right? So today what I'm going to show you is impossible. That's the word that was used to describe what was requested of one of my coworkers, who's not completely anonymous. He knows who he is. That's a good thing, too. So let's talk about what's wrong with less in SASS and static CSS in general. We've kind of talked about that before. So here's a couple quotes for you. Luis, who is a reviewer for Manning, noted that SASS once ate his dog, all right, which could no longer eat his homework, which means he no longer had a reasonable excuse for not getting things completed on time. Your parents have a bit of wisdom. Just because everyone else is using less in SASS doesn't mean you have to, too. And as I mentioned earlier, you have another abstraction layer associated with the web. By the way, if I can go off on a little rant here, I think web development has become DSL utopia. I mean, I've seen web projects with 15 domain-specific languages, right? As if HTML, CSS aren't enough. We've got to like obfuscate and re-obfuscate them through a couple of different compile modes where compile mode really isn't necessary. I mean, the fact that we have to go through, in some cases, 10 or 15 compile steps to look at our web application is probably an indication that you've added too many kitchen sinks into your build process. But hey, that's just me. All right. The key thing that I think is wrong about CSS currently is that all the methods that we use for a typical web applications create CSS at the wrong time. Seems like now would be a good time for a demo. So, let's bring that up. I'm going to show you a demo where we're going to pull up a web page and we're going to walk through a couple of different style sheets. So without further ado, there we go. By the way, this is used at Qualaroo. You're going to see quite a bit of Qualaroo here. I'm no longer working at Qualaroo directly, although I'm helping them out on a bit. But let's see, R&D. Here we go, the switch test. Okay. So what we see here is content. And I'm now going to click on this one button and watch what happens to this presentation. It moves from one point to the other. Bring this back over here, and I'm going to give you a little more involved one. Okay. There we go. I apologize for the delay there. So this is similar to what we first did. That was the first test. And the second test here is I am now clicking through the same content and getting 4 different presentations. Now, this is a proof of concept to achieve our ultimate goal here, which is to truly master CSS to a level heretofore unseen in our universe. Not to be too dramatic about it. But, so how many style sheets do you think we're using here? And I want to answer for you, because somebody, of course, is going to raise their hand and act the fool and go 4, right? So don't worry about that. You don't have to be that guy or girl, okay? The reality is that even though we're showing 4 different style sheets in use here, there's actually only 2 style sheets that we create for this DOM. And what we're doing is we're just swapping between the 2. As I click on this one, the one that's no longer in use is being written to. And then when I click on the button again, the newly ready style sheet is put into place, and the style sheet that wasn't ready is written to again. This is a form of double buffering. If you've ever done any computer graphics or you're a gamer or the like, you've certainly run into double buffering before and familiar with it. We're going to go further into depth on that in just a short while here. All right, so I'm going to fast forward now back to where we once belonged. And as I mentioned before, this is my book. This, by the way, won the Jolt Award this year. 3 awards were given by Dr. Dobbs Journal. It's a little magazine you might have heard of. We were one of the 3 winners this year for Book of the Year, the Jolt Award. So I'm very pleased with that. This is one of those little books that was supposed to be a couple hundred pages that ended up growing up to, I think, 430 pages after all. The appendices and everything are in there. So usually I have a lot of fun talking about myself, but I'm not going to worry about that too much here. If you're interested, go grab the slides off the website. Suffice to say, I didn't start developing websites and single-page web applications yesterday. All right. So let's talk about JavaScript-powered CSS, or what I'm going to call JS-CSS, because I hate saying real long things numerous times, especially in a presentation. So when I'm talking about JS-CSS, I'm talking about cascading style sheets that are created and applied on demand by your application. It's not static, it's not compiled or hand-coded. It's not loaded from external files. So again, one more time, we're creating it dynamically on demand. Therefore, you shall not SASS. All right? Good recommendation when dealing with my mother too, by the way. I found out once what happens when you do the other thing. Okay, so let's take a look at the JS-CSS Style Manager. So what we did at Qualaroo, my former place of employment, was that we developed this Style Manager software. And today, this is only the second time we're actually sharing it with the world. All right? Now, this doesn't mean that I have an incredibly large framework out there for you to go snag, but I'm going to go over all of the key elements you need to know about to employ application-controlled styling as opposed to statically compiled styling. You can replace less and SASS and static CSS in many cases, but not all, and I'll talk about the all in a little bit. And today we are going to talk about JavaScript, obviously. We kind of already have. Browser features and HTML, DOM, and CSS. If any of this is foreign to you, feel free to leave now. All right? But I get a feeling that you're probably all a bit familiar with some of these terms. Okay? And of course, I had to throw in the dump truck again because I spent like, I don't know, 20 minutes photoshopping it. So I had to justify that. So let's take a look at an example. This is Qualaroo. Now, you don't have to go out and buy Qualaroo, guys. This is just a great example of how to apply this technology. And it also happens to be served right now to over 100 million people a day. All right? So that means that we cover somewhere around 2.8 billion people per month or thereabouts. 2.9. So, it kind of works. So if we serve to 100 million people a day, how many style sheets do you think we write? Well, by my estimate, we write about 120 million style sheets a day. Every single user gets their own custom style sheet written for them. Now, Let's look at the Qualaroo product. One of the products is online surveys, marketing surveys. We are the quintessential third-party JavaScript component, right? We got to tiptoe lightly. We can't screw up your your namespace, or you're going to come over and fire us, right? We've got to load everything in one file. That's the tiptoe lightly thing there, folks. Now, that file's got to be small. We can't use jQuery. I mean, we could, but you really don't want us to. We don't use iframes because we don't want to have that funky iframe, sent around your site. Although, not saying that iframes aren't useful in some instances, but we don't use them. We have no external images, no external CSS, no external HTML. One file contains all the data, presentation, and logic required for the application. And not only do we present on desktop, what I was brought in originally to do was to make this work on mobile. This is a great way to do it, by the way. We went and developed it on mobile, worked out all the bugs, and we ended up rolling it out to everybody. All the clients are now the same client, even though they look enormously different. Let's do a little example. You can play along at home if you're interested. You can go to my incredibly outdated michaelmikowski.com vanity site. Don't worry, there's no nudity. And you can actually see this in action. If you're on a laptop, you'll see a laptop form. If you're on a tablet, you'll see a tablet presentation. If you're on a phone, you'll see a phone presentation. Thank you. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Okay, so when you go to my page, you'll see a screener. This will only occur on a phone presentation. And then there's that screener for those who missed it. And then I threw an arrow in there in case you really missed it. And if you still missed it, you're asleep. Okay. There's the play along at home URL for you. Okay, so then our next step here is a multi-choice question. And the user might select, I find it useful, which of course is a wise choice. You may want to select 10 at the bottom there. And then here is a text input form. And then there's the thank you. Okay. That's just a walkthrough of the survey. I'm going to show you the reason why I bothered to bore you with that in the first place in just a minute here. So there is a reason. Work with me here. Okay. So is this simple? Well, anybody who's done flexible design across numerous device types knows that it's not. All right? We've got, not only do we have different screen sizes, we have varying levels of zoom and pan. Right? And one thing you don't see there, if you're playing along at home right now, if you go to a website and you're zoomed in very far on my web page, when the survey comes up, it looks exactly the same as if you're zoomed far out. If you're zoomed in and you're panned, or if you're zoomed far in and then you zoom out, it then resizes to look exactly the same. It dynamically rewrites the CSS dependent upon the environment, and the environment can dynamically change hundreds of times while a person is viewing it, which is pretty kick-ass. You'll excuse my French. Device orientation. Every time you rotate your phone or your tablet, CSS, a new style sheet gets written. The host color scheme. So what if we have a customer that has, oh, I don't know, a really cool black and red color scheme because they're a gaming site? Well, we've got to adjust to that. As I mentioned, we create CSS for every viewer. Let's take a look at some sample clients. There's our desktop. These are, by the way, all normalized for size here. There's a tablet. There's a 7-inch phone. There's a 4.7-inch phone. Oh, hey, we've got orientation as well. How do we make all this stuff look right on all of these different products? I'm not going to spend a lot of time looking at every one of these and analyzing every pixel. You guys can do that at home when you've got some time on your hands. But let's just walk through them. Take a look at how these screeners look different on different size tablets. Some cases they don't exist. Desktop, phone in different orientations, etc. Look at how different that desktop unit is compared to a large tablet or a desktop or a phone. See that? We even have different color schemes applied. Okay? So of course, we're just looking at somewhere around 35 different variations here. But if people start pinching to zoom and panning things around, you may be looking at hundreds or thousands of different variations that we're dealing with. So let's talk about the classic CSS hierarchy. I like the subtitle. Web 2.0 called and wants its styling strategy back. Okay? Typically, the way you build a CSS hierarchy is you have site rules, let's say Starbucks.com, which happens to be a Qualaroo customer, as a matter of fact. But they may have rules associated with their font colors and font sizes, etc., that apply to the entire site. And then they'll have regional rules. So maybe Starbucks Japan will have a different sort of a set of characters, one would hope anyway, than we have over here in the States. And then we'll have section rules. So in other words, Starbucks home products might be different than the Starbucks tea section, which may be different than the Starbucks coffee section. Then we'll have like page rules, right? Which are going to overwrite all these. And this cascade here, recognize as we go further and further down the hierarchy, the item that's closest to the bottom is the one that wins. So I might have a font size for site rules, and a font size for a regional rule, and a font size for a section rule, and a font size for a page rule, and a font size for, font size for a device rule, and a font size for your iPhone, because iPhones are special, that all overwrite each other. So it's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? So I have 7 rules. I have 7 different font sizes. If you go and inspect it in the DOM inspector, you'll see strike through 7 different times for the font size, or 6 different times, sorry. And that 7th magical rule will actually determine the font size you're using. Okay? That's not only hard to follow in some cases, but it's also one would think a little more expensive for the browser to render. So, but what about runtime data? What if somebody decides that they want to have their styling set up so that you have a nice bright daytime theme if it's during the day, and you want a nice nighttime theme if it's during the night? And you want a nice kind of effervescent glow if it's an eclipse, right? Well, it's a little more difficult to do. You basically got to pre-compile for those conditions. So device capabilities, you've got to pre-compile for that. What do we do for our iPhone? Well, we created an iPhone style that we shoved into a directory where we have hundreds or thousands of other files, certainly thousands of other styles. And, we dealt with it. How about orientation or number of touch points? Zoom and pan level, ambient temperature, ambient light. Heartbeat, that's a nice one, especially with all the health monitoring going out these days. Geolocation, stock market performance, all these things can be used to dynamically set styles, but we don't often do that these days, or only in very limited situations, because there's a problem with where CSS is generated. So if we look at our application hierarchy, our typical app structure looks like this. We have an environment. Inside that environment, we have a configuration. Inside of that, we'll have a build system. So our environment, you might think of as effectively our web browser and our server, right? Those two form the web application environment. Inside that, we'll have configuration for either of those. And then we'll typically have a build system on the server side. We will then take the build system to create our assets. Our assets will create HTML5, and they'll create images, and they'll create CSS3. And then finally, we'll have our logic that handles the JavaScript. Okay? There's our server out there. Here's our client in purple. And you'll see that we will bring in live data once we've pushed the logic to the client. So the problem is right here. That we're creating those assets after or before the logic shows up. Now, we've taken care of this in most cases with HTML and even inline images these days, because what do we do with an inline image? Or we load it to a canvas, right? And then we manipulate it however we feel like it, right? But CSS has remained the last bastion of static items that we don't manage within the logic, that is not responsive to the data, the live data. So what we did at Qualaroo is we turned things on its ear. Instead, what we did was we put the logic first. The logic's inside the build system. That's our JavaScript. Now we've got the live data that feeds to our application, and now our application manages all of our assets. That's how we put all of our stuff in one file. One HTTP request to one file that's compressed and gzipped to the size of a medium-sized JPEG provides the capability to provide surveys and marketing nudges with dozens of surveys to any type of device on the market, which is actually, I mean, I'm kind of proud of that. I told Mom. All right? So, you can, by using this technique, by having your application manage CSS, make it dynamic and respond to any data or any event that occurs either on the server side or on the client side. You don't even have to bother the server. In fact, our application very rarely bothers the server. We don't have somebody pinch to zoom and we go, hey, server, yeah, this guy pinched to zoom. Can we get a new CSS file from you? Right? How scalable do you think that is? No, we just go, hey, somebody pinched to zoom. Let's recalculate the style sheet and rewrite it. Okay? I'm going to show you today the practical issues that you need to overcome to be able to do that. Okay, so I'm going to show you what we needed to do to get this accomplished. Okay? So remember our style manager, right? Well, we clicked on these different pages, and remember I said that we have only 2 style sheets? Now let's get down to brass tacks, folks. We're actually going to talk about how that's done and the practical implications, limitations, yada, 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 yada. Okay, so we have a browser. The browser you can think of being broken into two primary categories. Now, if you were Microsoft, not only did you think about these as two primary categories, but until IE9, you actually bought your JS engine separately, and you made your own DOM manager, okay? Trident, and then they had this, the JS engine from, I forget the name of the supplier. Somebody out there, I'm certain, knows it. So you can think of a browser like this. Now, a user is viewing one of our clients' web pages, and a script tag is added, like many third-party applications. And that script tag loads a bundle of our application and our data. Then, once that is loaded and we verify the DOM is ready, we then create two empty style sheets, style sheet 1 and style sheet 2. I named them that because they remind me of my two first sheep that I owned. When the DOM is ready and it's time to display elements, the application calculates the first style sheet. It looks around at the environment and figures out what that style sheet should be. It then writes to style sheet 1 all the rules, and then it turns it on. It then applies the style to all the elements on the page. Now, I can hear some of you through this sense I have, thinking in your mind, but Mike, you all sound like William Shatner in my mind, but Mike, why would we do that? Why would we apply the style sheet only after it's written? Well, here's the answer, folks. Think about a page where you have 1,000 elements on the page. That's easily recognizable, right? Or easily imaginable. And you have 50 styling rules, 50 selectors you have to create. If you were to make that style sheet live and then change one styling rule, what does the browser do? It reflows. It looks at 1,000 different elements. And then let's say you apply the next change. What does it have to do? It looks at 1,000 more elements, the same elements all over again. So if you apply 50 changes, you've got 50,000 element reconsiderations. Expensive. If, however, you do it this way, you have to consider each element only once. So the more CS rules you have to change, the better idea this is. Okay? If you're doing just one style change, it's great to do it in line. If you need to change 5 things, you may actually be better rewriting or writing a new style sheet and then double buffering it, as I'm going to show you here. So when we need to change, we don't change the existing style sheet. We calculate the new style sheet and write that into style sheet 2. And only when it's complete do we apply it. At that point, boom, all the rules are applied to all elements and they get scanned once. And of course, if we need to change again, let's say somebody has reoriented the phone and zoomed in, we just continue the process. So as I mentioned before, we rewrite or write a custom style sheet for every single customer that sees our application. And sometimes they'll see dozens of style sheets per session, depending upon the device they're on. We use a style manager that takes care of that double buffering for us behind the scenes. All we do is say, here's our rules, make it right. And we haven't been sued by Outback Steakhouse yet, so we're going to stick with that. I don't want to go too far into this. In fact, I'm hardly going to go into this at all. This is just a view of the architecture that we were dealing with before we refactored and implemented the mobile strategy. All I want to point out here is that the style manager exists in the DOM rendering layer of the application. Okay, don't look at the slide anymore, please, because it's all just confusing at this point. The point I want to make is this. What we do is we make our application so that we can test it very thoroughly at the model level. The thing that renders what goes out to the screen is a very thin layer above the model, all right? And so that's where our style manager exists, okay? So what does that mean for real people? Well, that means that we can test almost all of our application without having to resort to Selenium or Zombie or anything like that. And it also means that the view render handler actually can be tested as well. But it is part of the presentation layer. Oh, I did want to point that out. I'm really proud of the fact that we went from like 250 public methods to 3 in the refactor. That's always a nice feeling. Okay. So the compelling results are that large changes can be done much faster, as we've talked about. Also, another neat thing, remember when I talked about the fact that styles can be overwritten like 7 times, right? Here, we do the cascade in software. So instead of having a font size change 7 times and having that stored in our style sheet, we actually calculate that out. So, and so our style sheets actually become much simpler. It's also much easier to debug. You know, if you have a problem with a style sheet today, you know how much fun that is to debug, right? Like, hey, it's supposed to look like this when it's evening. Oh, we have to go look at this compiled style sheet that came from a SASS system that was run during our build time, right? That, folks, I mean, you might have to go through 3 different departments to find out what's causing your bug. Here, you just go into your JavaScript code and fix it. It's also much faster, with a less stutter, I should say. So this is more talking about the same. So as I mentioned, the model controls content and styling, and ultimately allows you to do the impossible that we talked about at the very beginning, millions of possible styles of combinations. Now, practically, if you're writing for modern web clients, and by modern I mean anything as great as or greater than IE9, this is an excellent strategy to consider. Let's talk about when it might not be an excellent strategy to consider. Number 1, if you're in a shop that's very traditional and doesn't believe that the future of web applications is being a web application developer, and that you should have your Ruby on Rails working on the back end and your front end developers working on the front end, you're gonna, you know, that may not be an appropriate place to change things. I mean, culture will prevent that from being an effective solution. If you're just learning CSS, you might not want to approach this. It's better to worry about the these higher level kind of abstractions after you learn the basic technology. Less and SASS also have been around a long time. They do create copious amounts of CSS. Sometimes they even end up isolating people from real CSS, so you don't actually learn CSS as well as perhaps you should. But they do have guardrails around them, whereas this approach that I've been talking about, you really kind of have to know CSS pretty well. There are browser bugs. Weird stuff can and does happen, even in the supported browser list. Older browsers can't cope. So it's really not practical if you're trying to support IE8. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people who still are. We were lucky for Qualaroo. We support IE9 and above, Firefox 28, Chrome 28, Opera and Safari 6+. Although, actually, outside of IE9, those numbers are very conservative. I think it still runs in Firefox 4 or 5. And folks, that concludes my presentation today and leaves us 7 minutes of in-depth and exciting Q&A if anyone is interested. Thank you. Show us some code. How do I do it? Well, I explained it in detail. Yes, but I mean, how much code can I show here? Actually, so the question was, show us some code. And my answer was, I showed you code. No, I don't have a readily available library for this at the moment. Of course, I've written a readily available library that is in production right now, and I'm working with Qualaroo to make that available. It is pretty cool because, and in fact, you know what? I'm going to do you a favor. I'm going to show you some code. All right? All right? Don't say I never gave you anything. All right? Let me pull this over here, and I'm going to jack up the font size a little bit. Anybody out there use WebStorm? Excellent choice. By the way, I spent 4 days, 3-4 days, looking at the best IDE for web development, and at least a couple years ago, by far, hands down, WebStorm was the best choice. So if you're looking for a recommendation, and by the way, I'm a hardcore Vim developer from a long time ago. If it got me to change, that's pretty serious. All right, so I'm going to pull up you know what? I'm going to pull this up in Vim though because it's easier to increase the font size and show it to you. I'm going to show a little bit of now obviously I can't disclose a whole ton of stuff here, but I'm going to show you some cool aspects of this. One of the things that's an interesting aspect here is that the way that we create our style sheets. Take a look at the selectors over there. Okay? It looks almost exactly like classic CSS. Well, at least it does to my mind anyway. I've been staring at this stuff for months. But the point is that what we do is we create style sheets in JSON, effectively. Now, you can embed the JSON, or you can have the JSON be delivered to you via an AJAX call. And then that JSON is then computed on the fly to provide the styles we want. So as you see over here, there's and I have to bring this back here so I can see it a little bit better right now. What I have at this point is a reset class. Now, if you've been doing hardcore CSS for a while, you know you want to use a reset class, right? So this reset class allows us to isolate our styles from just about every other style that our host site can provide. Of course, there are those folks out there who insist on using the important flag in CSS, and we can't help them. But outside of that, this works really well. And so this is kind of the foundation for how we manage style sheets. And then remember we talked about a hierarchy, right? So let's look at this. This is the base. This is the base class. So there's a base map. And I'm going to look at, let's take a look at what happens when I have a small pop-up. Oh, looky there. Okay? So along the same lines of what you might do writing less in SASS on the server, you might say, oh, I have a map for, or a definition for small devices. And there it is. Now, that does not exist in a vacuum. Those are adjustments to the base CSS map. What's different here is that instead of us letting the browser figure out the cascade, we do it ourselves. So, if I have a class in the base map and I have the same, or sorry, selector in the first map, and a selector in a map lower in the hierarchy, and they conflict, the one lower in the hierarchy wins, and instead of having this cross-out mechanism, we just write the one that wins in that selector. So instead of having 7 font sizes, we have 1. And we only have one selector that is being used from one style sheet to affect the style of the element, not 7 selectors from 7 style sheets affecting it, where only one is significant. Okay? I'll show you a little something else about that. Let's take a look at that hierarchy a little bit further. So, a little more here. I'm going to pump up the volume a little bit and supersize it. McDonald's will be proud. And what you see there is it's relatively cryptic, and I won't go into the reason why you're seeing all the underscores, but trust me, there's a very good reason for it. But what we're doing there is we're creating the hierarchy for all the different form factors we provide. We have an embedded form factor, we have an overlay, we have a pop-up top left. Let me show you how these all play out in real life. Okay? So going back to said HTML, and I have to move this over here again so I can see it. All right, this is loads of fun, guys. This is actually what we use internally to test our style sheet. So now, notice I can click on overlay, and voila, here's an overlay. Okay? And foo at, that doesn't work. Foo at bar. All right. The same code that creates this overlay test is the exact same code that creates the pop-up. Check this out. Here's a pop-up device. All right? There we go. That's on the top left. I'll exit the demo. and then I'll go bottom right. And if I open up my debugger, you'll actually see that if I exit the demo here, that I have all sorts of debugging information that's popping up over here. So here, you guys like Markdown? We provide Markdown rendering as well. And what's pretty hip about it, oh, I know the reason why I don't have an internet connection. So it's trying to pull some images from the internet. So the bottom line is Markdown is supported as well here. And again, all of the style sheets here that I've shown you are all derived from that same set. So we've seen in my presentation here probably 8 or 12 different style sheets already, and I've just done a few clicks, right? Let's take a look at one more. So that cascade that I showed you is being applied for all of these. All right? The styles are turned on and off using a disabled. So what you need to do in order to effectively employ this plan is you need to go to the DOM, claim 2 style sheets in the style sheets object in the browser. And then once you claim those, nobody else can get their grubs on them. And then you're just going to write to those and clean them out as you need them. So let's say that you need a new style sheet. You write to the one that's disabled. Okay, when you're finished, you enable it, and then you wipe out all the rules in the disabled one now, and then that's ready for rewriting your style sheet rules. I think time's up, guys. But thank you very much for coming and being a wonderful audience. I appreciate it.